In this lesson, we are going to learn about the essentials of edges, how they relate to coloring, how they relate to painting, and the type of cornerstone they really are in art creation in general. But before we get to the edges themselves, it's important we learn about depth of field. Now, I want to do a practical exercise. Pick something up nearby to you and hold it as close to your face as possible where it is still kind of in focus. And just sort of focus on one point of that element. And what you'll probably notice, and it's something you've probably seen before, is that once that's in focus, everything else goes out of focus. It becomes very blurry. In essence, you've created a shallow depth of field by holding it so close to your face. Now, depth of field technically refers to the distance between the nearest and furthest objects that are in focus. That is the depth of field. You could almost call it the depth of field of focus, right? So the distance between the furthest and the closest objects that are in focus. Everything outside those areas is blurry, right, and out of focus. And so a shallow depth of field refers to an area that has only a small amount of objects in focus, and then near or foreground objects are kind of blurred and background objects are kind of blurred. And a deep depth of field refers to not much blurred in the foreground, not much blurred in the background. A lot of things are in focus. For example, landscape photography, generally speaking, a lot of things are in focus. When you talk about portrait photography, generally only the person's head is in focus, and then the background is beautifully blurred in that instance. Now, why does this matter? Well, just as a start, if we take a look at the edges of these stars, they're pretty nice and crisp. If we take a look at the edges of these stars, they're pretty blurry. And immediately to our vision, it tells us something to the likes of, hey, look at me, I'm in focus, and hey, don't look at me, I'm not in focus, I'm not important. It brings objects forward when they have sharper edges and pushes them back. Now, how this relates to us and how we paint has a lot to do with the brushes that we're using, or the edges of the brushes that we're using. And most art applications support multiple types of edges, right? They have a bunch of different brushes that do a bunch of different things. Now, here on the hard edges side, we can see what a nice, crisp, hard edge looks like. And then similarly with the soft edges and the lost edges. And in sort of your traditional, typical art theory or art fundamentals, you will be taught that there are three kinds of edges: hard edges, soft edges, and lost edges. Edges that are more implied, but not stated. They get lost. And it's simple enough to grasp this concept. We have some more examples here, just kind of showing what is happening between the edges. Now, once again, I want to reinforce that you want to think about hard edges almost as if they're saying, hey, I'm over here, look at me. They create such a strong contrast between values and, of course, the edge itself, that they draw the viewer's attention to themselves. And soft edges, on the other hand, are very timid and they don't want to be noticed. And they're kind of like, hey, don't really notice me. I'm not really here. Don't look at me. And that's the way you want to kind of think of soft edges. So we can use soft edges in the sense to push things back and hard edges to bring things forward, but we can also use edges in a compositional sense in our works, where we place hard edges, it draws their focus, right? So we can define focal points with edges and non-focal points with soft edges, right? And so that's the way we want to think about edges. But what I want you to do with edges as well is think very much of edges as you would a value scale, except in the world of edges. And so we'd have, let's just say, argument's sake, 10 steps. I'll do as many fit on the page here. But we are going to take this particular brush, it's a hard edge brush, and slowly lower its hardness. Now, not all apps support this, but that's not the point of the exercise. What we want to do is slowly soften the edge hardness. I actually wonder if this effect is even going to work. Okay, it is. All right. So we're slowly but surely hardening the edge hardness. And you can see almost most of this bar is pretty hard edged. And what you want to do is think about edges as a scale of edges going from very, very hard to increasingly softer and softer and softer and softer and softer, so that you think of edges as a broad range of edges. We'll go about this far, and then I'll use a soft brush just to indicate even softer edges. Okay, so think about edges as a scale, going from very hard to sort of firm, to kind of mediocre, to kind of soft, softer. Let's make that a little one softer, and then softest edges, right? That are really, there's almost no edge there. It just looks like some kind of smoke or gas or air. So think about edges as in an edge scale. Now we will elaborate on this more when we get to the style examples of the different coloring techniques and different painting techniques, and when we're doing those practical examples. But think on the theory, remember the theory, and if you can, please take notes. Edges really are a cornerstone of art that really a lot of artists push to the sidelines and only realize many years later how much they really needed all of this edge theory. As a last example, we're going to take a look at the impact edges really can have when it comes to focus. So here we have a series of red dots in the background and a blue dot in the foreground. And the only reason we're going to say the blue dot is in the foreground at the moment is because it's overlapping the red dots. But when we start manipulating the edges, we can see how our eyes are immediately fooled or tricked by what's happening when we change the edge types. So here we've blurred the edges of the background, and suddenly it appears like that blue circle jumps forward, right? But what happens when we then blur the blue circle and we keep the background sharp? Now our focus is deferred to the back circles. This is the power of edges, and it really is a simple thing to do, but like I said, quite often neglected. Keep this in mind when you're painting. Be mindful of your edges. Be very intentional at what points you want to use hard edges and what points you want to use soft edges, why you are using those edges at those various points. That's it for this lesson, and I'll see you in the next lesson.